us now in the Rally Point tent for the Vietnam Veteran Nurses Panel Discussion as part of the program celebrating May 12th as International Nurses Day. A panel of Vietnam veteran nurses from each of the services will recount their experiences during the Vietnam War, mending wounds, and tending to the mysterious ailments under harsh conditions and unrelenting fire. At the end of the panel discussion, they will lay a memorial wreath carried in procession to the Vietnam Women's Memorial, where it will be placed in memory of the women and the men who served in Vietnam and cared for the soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines. Please welcome to the Rally Point tent our discussion panel on Vietnam Veteran Nurses.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all for being here today to listen to the words and wisdom of three of our finest nurses who served in Vietnam. I'm Colonel Angela Simmons, the Commandant of the Graduate School of Nursing at the Uniformed Services University. It is an honor to be your MC today during this panel. Let me start by introducing our panelists. Note that today we did try to get one of our Navy nurses, Navy veterans, but were unable to arrange their presence here, so we've added 2 Army nurses, basically since we're the best. So first, I present to you Air Force Captain Lois Gay. Captain Gay served in Vietnam from March of 1968 to December of 1969 as a flight nurse assigned to the 902nd Air Medical Evacuation Squadron from Clark Air Base in the Philippines. While serving in Vietnam, they picked up patients at various locations in South Vietnam and took them to Cam Ranh Bay Field Hospital. They transported wounded Korean soldiers back to Korea and served 7 different countries in Southeast Asia. Additionally, they had a special mission of waiting for the release of the POWs so they could provide care for them. She returned home after Vietnam and served for 6 additional years. Then she met the love of her life and married Bill and had 2 lovely children, after which time she left active duty and served as a military spouse and proud mama. I introduce to you Lois Gay. Our second panelist is Colonel Retired Dr. Chuck Thompson, an Army nurse who served in the military from February 1967 to June 1993. While on active duty, Colonel Thompson's most notable positions include Chief, Nursing Education and Staff Development, Director of the Army's Licensed Practical Nurse Program, Chief, Department of Nursing, and numerous positions in the DoD Health Affairs Defense Medical Systems Support Center, including co-clinical lead for the development of the DoD's first electronic health record, better known as the Composite Healthcare System, or CHCS, as many of us know. Interesting fact, today we're evolving into MHS Genesis, where we're starting to go away from CHCS, but look at how long it served us well. So nice job, sir. In Vietnam, Dr. Thompson served in Charlie Company, 9th Support Battalion, 198th Light Infantry Brigade, the American Division in the 7th Surgical Hospital. Since retiring, Colonel Thompson has had a wonderful career in informatics, including serving as the Associate Professor of Health Administration Informatics at the University of Maryland Global Campus. But most importantly, he is a husband to Patricia, a father to 1 son who's a commander in the Navy. We won't hold that against him. And 4 of the smartest and best grandkids ever. Help me welcome Colonel Thompson. And last but certainly not least is Miss Grace Moore, who comes to us today from a small town called DeWar, Iowa. she attended Joseph Hospital School of Nursing in Ottumwa, Iowa, where she heard a recruiter talking about the Army Student Nurse Program in 1965. Smartly, she joined the Army Nurse Corps in 1966, and after basic training, she served at Reynolds Army Hospital in Fort Sill, Oklahoma. In May of '68, Moore transferred to the 12th Evac Hospital in Chu Chi, Vietnam, where she was assigned as the head nurse of an orthopedic amputation unit. It was here that she learned the true meaning of teamwork and how essential it was to be able to count on your colleagues. The things she learned in Vietnam carried over to her professional civilian nursing career throughout various positions and different facilities. In the very early days of the Vietnam Women's Memorial Project, Grace met Diane Carlson Evans and became the Pennsylvania State Coordinator. She continues serving today as an active veteran in her local community, speaking at various schools and events about the role that women played in the Vietnam era. Please help me welcome Ms. Grace Moore. So, thank you all for making your way here to help us today to provide a glimpse into the life of Vietnam nurses. Let me begin by saying Happy International Nurses Week to you. Thank you. So I have a couple of questions that we're going to start off with. I'll start in no particular order with you, ma'am. That's the punishment for sitting so close to the moderator. As you look back on your experience serving in Vietnam, what do you think was the greatest lesson that you learned, and how did that influence patient care today?
The greatest lesson that I learned was compassion. It was difficult to see. I was 24 and the patients were teenagers, essentially. And knowing that they were maimed so badly that they would live, but they were going to live with this injury all of their lives, not to mention the mental anguish. So, and then coming home to such a difficult return. So I just learned, it really was humbling, and I would say compassion was the thing that I learned the most.
Thank you. Dr. Thompson.
I think
Just push it up.
I think the biggest lesson that I learned was, and I agree, we were actually kids in Vietnam. I was 22 years old. I'd been out of school 1 year. So we have all this knowledge and skills, and you wonder if you're going to be able to do it. And what I found was that not only myself, but all of our colleagues was just an absolutely, we were like a well-oiled team to take care of patients. And I agree, it could be very, very emotional at times. We could have 2 or 3 patients, we could have 35. And so when you had these mass casualties coming in, you really learn really what triage is all about and how you're going to take care of patients.
Thank you. For everyone in this tent, at ease. At ease. We're having a hard time hearing our panelists because there's so much conversation in the tent. So if you're not interested in the panel, that is fine. Please exit or have a seat and talk softly so we can pay respect to our panel that's up front. Thank you. So ma'am, I leave you with the same question. As you look back on your experience, what do you think are the greatest lessons that you learned and how they influence care today?
I have to agree with both panelists. I think we learned compassion. We didn't just take care of physical wounds. We took care of we were the kid's mother or their girlfriend or their wife. And so we took care of their physical wounds, and we took care of emotional wounds, and we held hands, and we put people under beds when incoming was happening. Again, I too think learning teamwork was probably the best thing I learned over there, because it made me know how to act and react in a stressful situation. And any of you who are nurses know that there are stressful situations in your career. So I learned that, and I'm thankful.
Thank you. And Ms. Moore, how many patients do you think you received on an average day, and about how long did you all care for them before they were evacuated?
I don't know that there was an average day. My unit was in a Quonset hut, and we had 30 beds. Some days we didn't get any, but the beds were mostly full with people who had been there. Our mission at the 12th evac was to get patients in, stabilized, and out of country in 3 days if they were going out of country and not back to their units. I couldn't even begin to guess how many patients came through. I did read a statistic several years ago that at that particular time, it was right after Tet, we were along the Cambodian border. I've heard that the 12th evac was the busiest hospital with the lowest mortality rate. Now, I've not looked it up, but that's what I heard, and I believe it. We were really, really busy. They just kept coming, and we fixed them up as best we could and hopefully sent them home.
So what, you said you had the lowest mortality rate. What do you contribute that to?
The excellent care that they received and the fact that they got to either an aid station or a facility very quickly. I mean, soldiers in any other war were not able to be treated that quickly because they weren't transportable, I guess you would say, to a facility that took care of them.
Okay. Sir, I ask you, how many patients did you all on an average day, and how did you take care of them before?
It's interesting. When I went to Vietnam, I first went over with the 9th Support Battalion of the 198 Light Infantry Brigade. So I was the only nurse assigned. We were out in a battalion aid station, and we would have 1 to 2 casualties per day. And we did not have anesthesia capability because I was in that slot and I was not an anesthetist. So we got them to the proper care as quickly as we could. When I was at the 7th Surgical Hospital, again, it really was dependent. And I got to the 7th Surgical Hospital. I traveled to that hospital assignment the night of Tet. And so I got to the 7th Surgical Hospital, and the first day I spent with patients in the bunkers because we were almost overrun. So, and then throughout Tet, we were receiving anywhere from 30 to 35 a day.
Okay, thank you. And Captain Gay, I know you guys evac patients, so
Right.
how was your experience like with the evac, and how many on average did you guys take out?
As we filled our aircraft, as we puddle jumped to take them to Cameron Bay, we just had them for hours, and our top load would be 24 litter patients and 34 seats. We had airline seats. And the litter patients were in pajamas, and the ambulatory patients were in whatever part of the uniform they had. And of course, we had to be aware of, they weren't really graded, so we had to be careful for any patients that we thought might be a threat to opening a door or doing different things. You really had to triage them as they came on board, because you really didn't get a report. You got a report that here they are, and everybody had some kind of a tag that we could annotate medications and treatment. We mainly continued, we had to mix all the antibiotics and everything, but on the flight back to the Philippines, we had time to reconstitute, so that wasn't a problem. But usually leaving Vietnam, we had a full aircraft.
So prior to going to Vietnam, were you trained as an en route care nurse?
We were trained. We went to the flight nurse school in San Antonio, and that was a 6-week course. And they touched on all kinds of different things to prepare us. And then once you were a flight nurse, you may not fly. It's just the fact that you were earmarked that you've gone through the school. You had to do the chamber, the altitude chamber and everything. Then when we got on flight status, we had to go to sea survival, and ours was in New Mizzou, Japan, and that was really an experience. Once you go through that, it's like you're supposed to evacuate and take care of all these patients, and actually you're going to be lucky if you survive it, let alone you're not going to be doing the breaststroke with people that have casts that you've had or bivalve that you have to take off. So thank God we had some bouncing around in God's heavens, but we didn't have any bad landings or anything like that. So I was glad we didn't have to deal with ditching and or crashing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we talk again, I'll touch back and keep with that theme of training. Ms. Moore, with you were leading an orthopedic unit. What did you feel like prepared you most, or did you feel most prepared to care when you were in Vietnam?
I don't think I was prepared for Vietnam, but I was well prepared at my nursing school, which helped. We did have to go to basic at Fort Sam, and we had rudimentary education down there, but nothing specific, I guess I would say, for a lack of a better word. Most of my learning, because I was there in '68 and it was very busy, most of my learning was on-the-job training and from my colleagues. I mean, we supported each other. There was none of this, oh, the new guy kind of thing. You were one of the guys. You weren't just the new guy, you were another pair of hands, and they taught you right away. Your colleagues taught you right away what you needed to know. And it was, I don't think any human being that ever went to war could say they were prepared for war. You're not. I mean, whatever you see in war, regardless of what you did, it's nothing you saw in the States or where you came from. So you just I guess we kind of winged it, and we did okay.
Thank you. Colonel Thompson, same question. Training, what was your training like, and do you feel like it prepared you?
I was assigned to the orthopedic unit in Fort Hood, Texas. So I was there from April through September when I deployed. So I took care of the patients that were returning from Vietnam. So I had really excellent one-on-one experience taking care of orthopedic patients. And like you were saying, our schools were very good. We were well-trained. We were novice practitioners, but again, we just kind of seemed to fit right in where we were needed.
You're waiting, ma'am, aren't you?
Okay.
You're ready.
I am. So after I graduated from nursing school, which was a diploma program, and we certainly got nursing care skills because we provided the care for the hospital. That's why our educations were so inexpensive. And then I came to GW, and I ended up working on the orthopedic ward, which was really helpful to me. And but I really liked pediatrics the most. So when I came in the Air Force, our chief nurse said, ask where you wanted to work. And I said, oh, I would love to work on pediatrics. And she said, well, you can. So I did. And after I went to flight school and came back, they put me on the casualty staging area for flights coming in and out to sort of get an idea of what AirVac was going to be like from a different perspective. So that coupled with my flight nurse school, and then once you're working with all the people that you work with during that, or I worked with during that time, were all top-notch people that really had good skills and were dedicated. And so that was really a wonderful experience. We all learned from each other also.
Thank you. Now, you lead right into my next great question for you, and that is regarding children. I know with the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, taking care of children is the one category of patient that I think our nurses, by and large, would say they were unprepared for. So, Colonel Thompson, I'll start with you and your perspective. Did you guys take care of many children while you were deployed, and what was that experience like for you?
We actually did, and I had one experience. I was briefly attached to the 1st Marine Division Hospital in July, and we had to transport a baby out to the repose. So I was tasked to take the baby out to the repose. And I found it just an unbelievable experience only because we're in our fatigues that I don't think were ever dry the entire time I was in Vietnam. They were always damp. And so I came on the ship, and I find these people in beautiful white uniforms, and then after I reported out with the baby, they took me to the dining room to have dinner, and they actually had white tablecloths and silverware, and I was just astounded. And another thing, when I was at the Semi-Surge, I loved taking care of the kids, and I've got some pictures of kids that I actually wrote home and asked my family to send children's clothing. And so I've got pictures of some of the kids, little kids, with some of the clothes that were sent. So it was a wonderful experience. And by the way, when I got back from Vietnam, they assigned me as head nurse on pediatrics, and I thought I would kill myself.
That's awesome. Ms. Moore, how about you? Did you guys take care of many children?
We had one Vietnamese ward, and that was mostly women and children. I had one child on my ward because I was the only ward that had a hospital bed that could support traction, and he had been injured by a water buffalo, so he had to have his arm in traction until he could go home. The other children that we took care of is when we went into the village. We went in for MedCap, Medical Civilian Aid Program, and we would go in, we would vaccinate the children, we would tend to wounds, we would do whatever we could. And when I went over there, the nurses were allowed to go on MedCap, and I went twice. And then the nurses were stopped from going because the roads were mined, and they felt that we weren't safe enough, I guess, to go with the rest of the people that were going in. But that's the only children I ever had encountered.
Ma'am?
I only had one flight with a Vietnamese child and her grandmother, who we picked up to. They weren't really sick. They needed transportation, and we had extra seats, so we were able to take them. But one of our missions was when we'd go to Japan, we would then go to Misawa, Japan to pick up the wives, because dependents were there, and the wives would come down to Tachikawa to have their babies. So it was like a 6 weeks turnaround for them. So we would pick them up, and then 6 weeks later, we may meet up with them, or another crew would take them back with the baby. So that was, when you got to do that, that was sort of a treat after the other things that we were seeing.
Thank you very much, yes. So transition with me now to combatants. Did any of you have an experience where you had to take care of one of the or some of the enemy combatants? the enemy?
I did, because I had, if there were combatants that were injured and had orthopedic injuries or open wounds, they came to my unit. Anytime I had a combatant, I also had an MP who was armed and was on the unit. I only had 2 while I was there, but nurses are nurses. You're going to take care of patients. You may not have liked what they did, but you're still going to take care of them. That's our creed, is to take care of the sick.
Sir?
I also had the experience of working with the Viet Cong, and one of the, I agree, they were patients, they had things that needed care, and we took care of them just like we took care of everyone else. One of the things I found interesting, though, we had Republic of Korea, ROC staff that we also were taking care of in the same unit. And this was like an intensive care unit. And one thing we had to be careful about was they really, we had to make sure that the ROCs did not come in contact with the Viet Cong patients. They just did not want to be around them at all. So it just added a different dimension to the patient care.
We had the same experience. We would take the Koreans back to Korea, but that was only an aircraft full of Koreans. When we were picking up POWs, we only had POWs. We didn't even have our own service people there. It was just to avoid any kind of conflict or problem. So we did keep them separated.
Thank you. Thank you for shining a light for us on that. So, Colonel Thompson, tell us about your experience. Clearly, at that time in the 60s, there probably weren't a lot of male figures for you to look up to in the nurse corps. So tell us about your experience as a nurse serving in the nurse corps during that time frame.
It's very interesting. I mean, I joke. I was drafted into the Army. I had not planned on going in the Army. So I was a second class in my diploma program. There were 3 of us. So when I got to the Army Nurse Corps, I did find more men in nursing, but I don't know what the number would be, but I would probably say maybe 5 to 10%. There weren't a lot of us. But again, I found the men just assimilated right in, and it's wonderful to see the number of men in nursing today. And from my perspective, from a career perspective, I mean, I had a wonderful career, wonderful mentors, wonderful colleagues, and I was highly educated by the Airman Nurse Corps Scholarship Program. So I found that it truly was one of the most positive experiences of my life.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So, as we near sort of the end of the panel, I want to open it up for you guys to talk about one of your most memorable experiences there and how that, we talked about how it influenced patient care, but how did it influence you personally? I know, no one's picking up the mic. So since you mentioned that, ma'am, how about we start with you?
Any nurse that served in Vietnam has a special story. I have a couple, but the one I'll share with you won't make me cry. I had a soldier come in. We didn't pay attention to rank or anything. We just took care of him. And he was in a full body cast. And we had incoming, and the patients that we could get under the beds, we did. The ones we couldn't, we covered with flak jackets, feet to head. And so this gentleman said, "Lieutenant, I want to get under the bed." I'm like, "I'm really sorry. We can't get you under the bed. You are in a body cast." And back then they were plaster, so they were heavy, right? And he said, "But Lieutenant, I want to get under the bed." And I'm like, honestly, I'll cover you with flak jackets. I'll stay here right beside your bed. We can't get you under the bed. And so he started rocking. I hollered at my ward master. I said, get over here. This guy's going to throw himself out of the bed. So we got him under the bed. I have no memory of putting him back, but I met that man. The meeting part was a long story, but someone gave me his phone number. I called. I said, hi, my name is Grace Moore, and his wife said, oh my God, my husband is waiting for your phone call. So now I'm like, and he gets on, he goes, this is General so-and-so. Like, okay, I got this. I said, are you the young man that tried to do a face plant on my cement floor in 1968? And he goes, yes, ma'am, that was me. That's a story I can tell without crying.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. Ma'am, I'm going to take you next.
I don't know what to say. There were a lot of memorable times, but I think one of the things that really impressed me was the esprit de corps with everybody I worked with, and how we each helped each other as we experienced things that were just really hard to deal with. And everybody was growing at a different rate, but at the same time, we all worked together, and our main goal was taking care of the patients, and if somebody wasn't doing exactly what they should be doing, they were really reminded very gently that they needed to step up. And so I think that just having that experience, and the motivation, of course, was the patients. You wanted to do everything you could do for them. As much as you could do was what you did.
Thank you. Sir.
I'm like you. I mean, I have lots of stories, and I think one of the things that just was sobering for me was when we had multiple casualties coming in and having to triage and wait to care for patients, because our first mission is save life and limb. And we also knew that there were going to be some patients who would not make it. And so being in that time to spend with that soldier and them asking, am I going to be all right? And holding their hand and said, you're going to be fine. Those are really tough things to do, but it's something like you said, we had a camaraderie and just a spirit, and again, we were there for patients, and the soldiers and the sailors and all of the women who worked and we cared for, we were honored to do that because they were the ones that truly protected us. And another thing I'll say, because one of the things that I think about are the dust-off pilots. I don't know if you guys remember them. They were heroes. And I can remember them just sacrifice after sacrifice getting patients to us. So again, it was a time that I look back on with a lot of positive things about. I look back on it with some negatives, but the biggest thing I look back on is just the pride that I got the opportunity to serve.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you all for that. So finally, one of the things that we've seen also is that nurses have dealt with their deployments in various forms. We today place a lot of emphasis on taking care of your mental health, and that being the thing that keeps you safe in the future. So my last question for you all is, how did that work for you? How did you take care of your own mental health so that you could continue to be productive, you could continue to take care of patients and to take care of your families as you went forward? So how did you do that? Yes, ma'am.
When we were over there, we put our feelings in a box. You couldn't engage your feelings and do your job. So maybe once or twice during your tour over there, you might have to take yourself aside and have a talk with yourself. I think probably everyone did at least once. Coming back, I was pretty lucky because I am from a town of 125 people. So I had no protesters at the one gate airport. The people in my town would say, what was it like or whatever, and they'd want you to say something, and then all of a sudden, during the conversation, you would see this screen go down in front of them, and you're like, okay, that's all they want to hear. And like many, many, many of us, we just put Vietnam in a box and stuffed it in the back of the closet. I did not talk about Vietnam until the 80s. One of my best friends called me on the telephone, and that's how I got started talking. Best thing I ever did. As far as coming back and having something for us to go to, we didn't have that. And I am so proud now that there is a mental health aspect to people coming back from deployment. That's so important.
Colonel, my name is Linda Schwartz.
I think
Air
when
Force.
I got back from Vietnam, I got married shortly thereafter. And so I guess the first thing you try to do is to bring some normalcy to your life. Get back in the groove with family. There are things that I will never forget. And there are certain times that all of a sudden I get kind of a flashback of something. But, it's been a joy to me to have family and friends, very supportive family and friends. My wife was absent, and still is, after almost 55 years, a very supportive partner. So, I feel very fortunate. And like you said, I can remember coming through the San Francisco airport and being jeered. So it is nice to see some recognition that we did do something that people feel that we did well.
Thank you.
When I came back, I had a difficult time in that I had a sponsor, but she wasn't very helpful, and so I was living in Phoenix, and so I went house hunting myself and thinking I'm going to start anew, and so I found an apartment that was just right, not far from the base. It had air cooling, air conditioning, what's the difference? Well, I really found out because I was working nights and 3 to 11 in air conditioning and sleeping in the daytime in the hot Phoenix weather. So I had a friend that was in Las Vegas, and she came down and helped me find a real apartment. And then things started to go better. But I also had trouble with working with my peers, which I never had a problem with before. But a lot of the young corpsmen that I was working with at the time had not been trained, and they were doing things very haphazardly. And I remember calling it to their attention, and it was like, well, this is the Air Force. This is how we do it. I said, oh, not in my Air Force. And so we had to sort of make some alignments, but it was difficult at first. Even from active duty people that were like, well, you were on Aerovac, so you think you did more. I said, you've got to be kidding. Everybody did what their assignment was. So there was a lot of sort of undertones of who did more most and all that, and I'm glad all that is way behind us.
Thank you. Thank each of you very much. We have time for just one question or comment.
Thank you, and I apologize for butting in, but people that know me understand. My name is Linda Schwartz. I was Air Force from 1967 to 1986. I want to tell everybody here, and you as well, Colonel, that at the time of the Vietnam War, nurses were not eligible for the diagnosis of post-traumatic stress disorder.
Right.
In fact, if they went to the VA, the very first question was, did you have a combat infantryman's badge? That was actually, I worked on a study as a questioner. In 1986, we proved, without a shadow of a doubt, after dealing with hundreds of nurses who served, that the nurses who served in Vietnam and on the line flying saw more death and dying than the average combat soldier. And I think if this is the end, maybe we want to see how many of those nurses are here today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So thank you.
They want to stand up. They want to stand.
They want us to stand up, you said? All Vietnam nurses, please stand. Thank you, thank you, thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and welcome home. Thank you to our panelists. Thank you to you guys for showing up today, and welcome home. As you notice, the beautiful wreath out front, it was a wreath that was donated by Air Force Colonel retired Sarah J. Smith, who is the wife of Mr. Eric Minton, the Camp Legacy mayor. Colonel Smith could not physically be here with us today, but sends her love and donated this beautiful wreath. Colonel Smith, today we thank you for your many years of service and dedication in helping others. You're an inspiration, and your light shines today. As two of our military nurses will lay the wreath at the Women's Vietnam Memorial. If you are able, please join our wreath bearers as they take the wreath over to the memorial. So I introduce to you today Army Captain Danielle Craig and Navy Lieutenant Alfredo Fonacher as they walk over and lead you guys to the Vietnam Women's Memorial. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you to our panelists today.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panel for an engaging and informative discussion. For those